But I think the most exciting thing that happened to me after that was when I was called again into Mr. Doherty's office, and he said, "We've got a new product we're going to promote called Gatorade. Do you think you could help introduce the product?" And so I said, "Mr. Doherty, I don't know." And Doherty, from beneath his desk, pulled a bottle of green Gatorade, all kinds of different colors now. And he said, "We're going to make this a household word." So I was very aggressive promoting Gatorade.
Tell us how you did that.
Well, at one point I went to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the Los Angeles Rams were playing the Minnesota Vikings. And I served cold Gatorade to the Rams, because they were from LA, and hot Gatorade to the Vikings, because they were obviously in Minnesota. At the halftime, the Rams were leading. And a guy named Tom Mack, a huge guard, about 270, came over and he lifted me up on his shoulders and he said to his teammates, "This is the guy, he's serving his Gatorade, we're winning." Well, they lost the game. It was as fast as I could get out of the stadium as my legs would take me. But we did a lot of things like that. We did huge promotions of Gatorade with airlines, with hotels, all over the world, and it worked. Every time a competitor entered the market, Sport Aid or something else, we analyzed it and we went very hard against that competitor, aimed at really showing the competitor we had the stuff it took, and we were very successful. The product today is massively successful. I don't drink it any longer, but it was really successful then. Nobody really knew it. There was a guy named Bob Cade, Dr. Robert Cade, at the University of Florida, who developed it for his team. And he was one day going through Indianapolis, and there was a layover in his flight from Chicago back to Florida. And I heard he was at the airport, so I went out and I said, "Dr. Cade, why don't you come and talk to the people at Stokely Van Camp?" He said, "Van Camp," he said, "it's pork and beans." I said, "Why don't we make it pork, beans, and Gatorade?" And he went to Stokely Van Camp with me. We sat down with a man named Hank Warren, who was the head of marketing. And Warren could barely contain himself in his chair. He wanted to sign Cade to an agreement. We eventually did sign Cade to an agreement. Stokely marketed the bejesus out of the product, and it was hugely successful. Today, it's a product for Pepsi. Pepsi saw the brilliance of it. There is a woman who was absolutely brilliant woman who purchased Gatorade and who drinks it every day. She was terrific. A person came up to me literally 40 years ago and said, "You know, you've had a lot of experiences. You should really write a book." And I said, "Oh, I don't know. It takes a lot of time." And he said, "No." He said, "You write a book, a sentence or a paragraph or a chapter at a time. You don't write the whole book." And of course, he's right. And I was on my way that time to North Troy, Vermont. And I was going to do a project for a company called Weyerhaeuser. I was going to help shut down one of their plants. So I was a young guy. I wore a dark blue suit. And I was at the back of a room, a church actually. And there were probably 70 or 80 plant workers, guys with mother tattooed on their arm and body shirts in the area. And the Weyerhaeuser guy stood up at the front of the place and he said, "Mr. Dilenschneider has come to you from New York to deliver a message, Bob." And I had to walk up through this group in a dark blue suit with a white shirt. And frankly, they didn't like seeing me. I was terrified. But it was clear to me that if I understood what was going on around me, understood the environment I was in, which is what leads to the book, I could be successful. I was not successful that day. It was first published, a bestseller, very successful. I really wanted the reader to walk away with things that could help him or her with their career. And I said to myself, "Well, what's your career all about?" And I said, "Your career is about work you do, your relationship with your boss, your relationship at home, once your job is done, all these relationships." So I wrote a book about the relationships, several books actually, and the book was hugely successful. I'm currently working on a book on character, people who exhibited levels of character in their lives that have lessons for all of us to think about. People like Abraham Lincoln, people that did God's work. I think that's what the book's going to be very successful. The greatest challenge was finding the right material to put in, because there was a lot of material, and focusing through the material so that the book really came up. The greatest problem was ensuring that clients, because I was in the public relations business, who would read the book were not offended by it. And I was fired by one of the clients who read the book. And I'll never forget that. The general counsel came to my office and he said, you know, you've included company X, I won't say who, in the book. I said, yeah. He said, we're not going to be able to do business with you any longer. I said, you got to be kidding. He said, no. He said, we just didn't like it and we don't want it. You should have checked with us. Well, I didn't, and I paid the price. Read the chapter headings. Make sure the chapter headings, if they are there without any text behind them, the chapter headings tell a story. That's number one. Number two, start every single chapter with a powerful example and powerful words. That's number two. Number three, if you're going to do it, include questions at the end of the chapter. And if you don't like it or your publisher doesn't like it, include ideas and suggestions that can lead to the minds of questions in the eyes of the reader. Those are three very simple rules. Examples are absolutely critical. Taking yourself personally out of the book and including people in the book who are those people you know is very, very important. I was very close to a man named Theodore Hesper, who ran the University of Notre Dame. And I included Father Ted in a number of books, and the guys at Notre Dame loved it. And they all bought the books. So I was guaranteed several thousand copies. Total fluke for me, but once we accepted it, my publisher told me that Power and Influence is one of the most beloved phrases and statements of all time. That's why they were using it. I was excited by that. I wanted to update the first version of Power and Influence. That's the first book I wrote 4 years ago, because so much has changed. And I wanted to insert into the new book all the things that have changed and all the things that are different. But I found one thing along the way. The basic principles are the same. They've not changed. The formats, the techniques, they've changed. But the basic principles have not changed. And so whether it's civility or decency or whatever it happens to be, those things still work. How to figure out the answer or the solution to a problem. How to actually think about it so you come up with something and don't just jump off the cliff and take a chance or a risk. That was extremely important. Along the way, I've met a lot of people. Frank Luntz is a good example. He's a researcher. And I always turn to Frank and say, what about this, Frank? And he frankly always comes up with something I didn't think of. And so I think most people out there that I work with don't do that. They just take a risk, and it's oftentimes a very big risk. Sit with the expert and get to know that person over and over. There was a man I met many years ago named Tony Schwartz. Tony was really smart when it came to advertising short messages. I sat with Tony for days, and to the point where Tony said, could you go get some lunch? And I said, no, I'm going to bring it in, Tony, so you and I can keep talking, because he was very good. He taught me a lot. There are a number of people that can teach every listener, every viewer of this program all that. You just have to open up your mind to it. Successful. The current book, by the way, as we're talking, is number 4 on the bestseller list. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Had the book published, I showed my mom and dad, and I could tell that they were extremely pleased with what had happened. They would never say that, by the way, but I could tell they were extremely pleased. And that meant a lot to me. And the fact that I was able to do something that made them happy, made them look good, it was very important to me. And that's one of the big payoffs.